Most people assume that when they avoid something important, it means they're lazy, unmotivated, or lacking discipline. That explanation feels logical, but it's actually incorrect. Avoidance is rarely a character flaw. It's a protection response. Your brain is not designed to prioritize importance. It is designed to prioritize safety. And safety, from your brain's perspective, does not mean success, growth, or achievement. Safety means familiarity, predictability, low effort, low uncertainty. Anything unfamiliar, even if it's beneficial, is automatically evaluated as a potential threat. So when you hesitate to begin something meaningful, your brain is not sabotaging you. It's performing its primary job. It's protecting you from what it perceives as risk. The strange part is that the more important something is, the more uncertain it feels. And the more uncertain it feels, the more your brain quietly resists it, not because it's bad, but because it's unknown. Importance and comfort rarely overlap. The things that matter most often require decisions you haven't made before, effort you haven't tested yet, or outcomes you cannot fully predict. Your brain treats all of those conditions the same way. It marks them as unstable territory. And unstable territory is something it evolved to avoid. This response is ancient. Long before modern goals existed, uncertainty meant danger. Unpredictable environments meant risk. So the brain developed a simple rule: when something feels uncertain, slow down or step away. That rule is still active today. It operates silently, without your permission, and often without your awareness, which is why avoidance can feel confusing. Consciously, you may want to move forward, but subconsciously, your brain is pulling backward. Two different systems are running at the same time. One is focused on progress, the other is focused on protection, and protection almost always wins first. This is why logic alone rarely overrides hesitation. You can understand exactly why something matters and still feel resistance when you try to begin. Understanding speaks to your thinking mind. Resistance comes from your survival system. Those two systems do not communicate in the same language. One responds to reason, the other responds to perceived threat. So when people tell themselves they just need more motivation, they misunderstand the problem. Motivation does not cancel protection, insight does not erase caution, and willpower does not silence instinct. The brain's safety system is older, faster, and stronger than deliberate thought. It reacts before logic has time to speak. That doesn't mean you're stuck, but it does mean avoidance is not solved by pressure. Pressure actually increases the sense of threat. And when threat rises, resistance rises with it. What feels like lack of discipline is often just your nervous system doing its job. If you pay close attention, you can often predict avoidance before it happens. It usually appears in subtle ways first. You might feel the urge to check something else, delay starting, organize unnecessarily, or think about the task instead of doing it. None of these behaviors feel dramatic, they feel reasonable. That's what makes them effective. Avoidance rarely announces itself clearly. It disguises itself as preparation, caution, or timing. The brain prefers gradual retreats, not obvious ones, because obvious avoidance would be easy to notice. Subtle avoidance can continue for a long time without being questioned, and the longer it continues, the more natural it feels. Eventually, hesitation can start to feel like your personality instead of a temporary state. But it isn't your personality, it's a pattern. And patterns exist because they work. Avoidance works because it reduces discomfort immediately, even if it delays progress later. Immediate relief is one of the strongest rewards the brain can experience. When you postpone something difficult, tension drops right away. That drop feels good, not exciting, not dramatic, just quietly better. Your nervous system notices the change and records it. From the brain's perspective, anything that reduces discomfort is useful. It doesn't judge whether the relief is helpful long term. It only measures what happens in the moment. So each time avoidance reduces tension, the brain strengthens the connection between delay and relief. Over time, this link becomes automatic. You don't consciously decide to avoid. The response appears before conscious choice even forms. That's why people often say they don't know why they didn't start something. They weren't choosing delay. They were following a learned response. The brain had already associated hesitation with safety, and safety signals are treated as priorities. This is also why forcing yourself rarely works the way people expect. Pressure can push action briefly, but it doesn't remove resistance. In fact, it often increases it. When you apply pressure, your brain interprets urgency as a threat signal. Threat signals activate caution systems, and caution systems slow you down. So although pressure may create movement in the short term, it strengthens avoidance in the long term. The brain remembers that the task felt intense, and next time it approaches it with even more hesitation. This creates a frustrating cycle. You delay, then pressure yourself, then act briefly, then feel exhausted, then avoid again. It can feel like inconsistency, but it's actually a predictable pattern. The nervous system is trying to regulate itself. It's not opposing you, it's stabilizing you. The misunderstanding comes from assuming progress should feel natural. Often, unfamiliar progress feels uncomfortable at first. One of the most misunderstood ideas about productivity is the belief that important actions should feel compelling. People assume that if something truly matters, they should feel drawn toward it. But importance does not create attraction. Familiarity creates attraction. The brain prefers what it recognizes, not what it values. This is why people can feel drawn toward habits they don't even like, while hesitating around goals they genuinely care about. Recognition feels safe. New territory feels uncertain. So the brain leans toward what it already knows. This isn't irrational, it's efficient. Familiar actions require less energy, less evaluation, and less monitoring. Unknown actions require all three. That difference alone can make meaningful tasks feel heavier before they even begin, not because they are harder in reality, but because they demand more processing. The brain is always looking for ways to conserve effort, and unfamiliar actions require effort immediately. When effort appears early, the brain often interprets that as a warning. It assumes that if something feels demanding at the start, it might become overwhelming later. So it slows down. This slowdown is not laziness, it's prediction. The brain is forecasting possible strain and adjusting behavior to avoid it. What makes this confusing is that the prediction isn't always accurate. The task might actually become easier once started, but the brain doesn't know that yet. It only knows what it feels now. And present sensation always outweighs future possibility in decision-making systems. The nervous system responds to current signals, not imagined outcomes. So if something feels heavy at the beginning, the brain treats that heaviness as meaningful information. It doesn't wait for proof. It reacts immediately. That reaction can look like hesitation, distraction, or sudden fatigue. But underneath all of those responses is the same process: protection. Protection is often mistaken for resistance because the experience feels similar. When your brain slows you down, it doesn't announce that it's trying to help. It simply creates sensations that influence your behavior. You might feel hesitation, doubt, distraction, or the urge to switch tasks. These sensations feel personal, as if they come from your personality or your motivation level. But they are actually signals. Signals are instructions, not identities. The brain is communicating that something about the situation appears uncertain or demanding. That doesn't mean the situation is dangerous. It means your nervous system hasn't categorized it yet. Until it does, it treats the unknown cautiously. This cautious phase can last longer than people expect, not because the brain is stubborn, but because it is careful. Carefulness is one of its main survival tools, and survival tools do not switch off quickly. Once you understand this, avoidance starts to look different. Instead of seeing it as failure, you can recognize it as information. Hesitation is feedback. It tells you that your brain is evaluating something unfamiliar. That evaluation is automatic. It doesn't require your approval, and it doesn't stop just because you want it to. But recognizing what's happening changes how you interpret it. Instead of thinking something is wrong with you, you can see that something is simply new to your system. New experiences always require adjustment. The brain needs time to observe, measure, and categorize before it relaxes. During that observation phase, resistance often appears, not because the action is impossible, but because the system is still learning about it. Learning always includes uncertainty, and uncertainty always includes caution. When viewed this way, hesitation stops being a flaw. It becomes part of the process. This is why comparison can quietly increase avoidance. When people compare their progress to others, they often assume that hesitation means they're behind. But hesitation doesn't measure ability. It measures unfamiliarity. Someone who appears confident may simply be operating in territory their brain already understands. Familiar territory produces calm signals. Unfamiliar territory produces alert signals. So the difference isn't always skill, it's exposure. The more often the brain encounters something, the less threatening it seems. Repetition reduces uncertainty. Reduced uncertainty reduces resistance. That's why actions that once felt intimidating can later feel routine. The task didn't change. The brain's interpretation did. It moved from unknown to known. And once something becomes known, it stops triggering protection responses. So what looks like confidence is often just familiarity, and what looks like hesitation is often just newness. Understanding this removes a lot of unnecessary pressure. If hesitation is a signal of unfamiliarity, then it doesn't need to be eliminated before action begins. It only needs to be recognized. Recognition changes the experience. When you know why resistance appears, it stops feeling mysterious or personal. It becomes predictable. Predictable sensations are easier for the brain to tolerate than confusing ones. Clarity reduces threat, and reduced threat allows movement, not because you forced yourself, but because your system no longer feels alarmed. This is why explanation can be powerful, not because explanation pushes you, but because it calms you. A calm nervous system evaluates differently than an anxious one. When tension drops, the brain can reassess the situation more accurately. Often that reassessment reveals that the task was never dangerous to begin with. It only appeared that way at first. When the brain begins to understand something, its response changes gradually, not instantly. People often expect insight to produce immediate transformation, but the nervous system doesn't operate that way. Insight informs the thinking mind first. The deeper systems that regulate safety take longer to adjust. They rely on repeated experience, not single realizations. So even after you understand why avoidance happens, you may still feel it. That doesn't mean the explanation failed. It means the learning process is still unfolding. The brain is comparing what it expects with what actually happens. Each time it sees that a situation is manageable, it updates its predictions slightly. These updates are small but cumulative. Over time, the unfamiliar becomes familiar, and as familiarity increases, resistance naturally decreases. Not because you forced it away, but because the brain no longer sees a reason to maintain it. This gradual adjustment is important because it shows that progress doesn't require dramatic effort. Many people believe change must feel intense to be real, but intensity is often a signal of strain, not growth. The nervous system prefers small confirmations over large shocks. Small confirmations allow it to revise its predictions safely. Large shocks force it to defend itself. That's why slow exposure tends to work better than sudden pressure. The brain is constantly updating its internal map of the world. Each experience either reinforces caution or builds confidence. And confidence, in neurological terms, is simply reduced prediction error. It means the brain can accurately anticipate what will happen next. When prediction improves, anxiety drops. When anxiety drops, movement feels easier. So progress is less about pushing harder and more about allowing the system to learn steadily. Learning, not force, is what changes behavior. Seen this way, resistance is not an obstacle standing in your path. It's part of the path itself. It marks the boundary between what is familiar and what is new. Every meaningful action crosses that boundary at some point. So encountering hesitation doesn't mean you're off track. It usually means you're approaching something your system hasn't categorized yet. That moment is often where people turn back, assuming the discomfort is a warning sign. But discomfort is not always danger. Often it's just unfamiliarity being processed. The brain uses sensation to gather information. It pays attention to what feels different because difference may contain risk. Once it determines that the difference is manageable, the sensation changes. The tension softens. The urge to delay fades, and what once felt difficult begins to feel neutral. Neutral is the brain's signal that something is now understood. Neutrality is an underrated state. People often chase excitement or motivation, assuming those feelings must come first. But the brain doesn't need excitement to act. It only needs stability. Stability means the situation is predictable enough that it no longer demands constant monitoring. When something feels stable, it requires less mental energy. And when energy demand drops, action becomes easier to sustain. This is why habits eventually feel effortless. Not because they became exciting, but because they became familiar. Familiarity reduces uncertainty, and reduced uncertainty reduces resistance. So the goal is rarely to feel inspired before starting. The goal is simply to become familiar through experience. Familiarity is what convinces the brain that something is safe, and once the brain accepts that, it stops holding you back, not as a reward but as a natural adjustment. When people realize that hesitation is protective rather than obstructive, something subtle changes. The experience stops feeling like an internal battle. Instead of trying to defeat resistance, they begin to understand it. Understanding shifts the relationship. Resistance is no longer an enemy that must be removed. It becomes a signal that can be observed. Observation reduces urgency, and reduced urgency lowers tension. This change is quiet, but it's powerful, because tension is what usually keeps avoidance active. When tension softens, the brain's alarm system relaxes. And when that system relaxes, the need to delay often fades on its own, not because you forced it to disappear, but because the condition that sustained it is no longer present. The brain doesn't hold on to protection signals when it no longer detects a threat. It lets them go naturally. That release often feels like relief, not effort. Relief is one of the clearest indicators that the nervous system has reassessed a situation. It means the brain has concluded that what once seemed uncertain is now understandable. That conclusion doesn't require motivation or pressure. It only requires recognition. Recognition is different from persuasion. Persuasion tries to push the system forward. Recognition allows it to settle. When the brain settles, its predictions become more accurate, and accurate predictions reduce hesitation. This is why calm understanding can sometimes change behavior more effectively than intense effort. Effort can move you temporarily. Understanding can change how the system responds permanently. Once the brain understands that something is manageable, it stops preparing you to avoid it. Preparation shifts into readiness. Readiness feels very different from urgency. Urgency is tense. Readiness is steady, and steady states are where consistent action becomes possible. If you think back to something that once felt intimidating but now feels ordinary, you can see this process clearly. At first, the situation probably seemed uncertain. Your attention was heightened. Your body was alert. You were evaluating every detail. Over time, that alertness faded, not because the situation changed, but because your brain learned about it. It gathered evidence. It compared expectations with reality. And when the evidence showed that the situation was manageable, the alarm response was no longer necessary. The experience became neutral. Neutral experiences rarely feel dramatic, which is why people overlook them. But neutrality is actually a sign of learning. It means the brain has integrated the experience into its internal map. Once something is on that map, it no longer needs special monitoring. It becomes part of the background instead of the foreground. This is why meaningful progress often feels quiet rather than exciting. The brain doesn't celebrate familiarity. It stabilizes around it. Stability is efficient. It allows attention to move elsewhere. So when something that once felt difficult begins to feel ordinary, it can seem like nothing changed. But in reality, a major shift has occurred. The nervous system has updated its model of the world. What used to trigger caution now triggers calm. That shift is subtle, but it's significant. Because once calm replaces caution, the brain no longer invests energy in holding you back. Energy that was used for monitoring becomes available for action, and action, when it no longer feels threatening, becomes easier to repeat. Repetition strengthens familiarity. Familiarity strengthens stability. And stability is what allows behavior to continue without strain. Progress rarely arrives as a dramatic moment. More often, it arrives as quiet normality. Seen from this perspective, avoidance is not something you need to fight. It's something you can understand. And understanding changes how the experience feels. When you recognize hesitation as a signal rather than a flaw, it loses much of its intensity. Signals don't need to be suppressed. They need to be interpreted. Interpretation gives them context. Context reduces confusion. And reduced confusion allows the nervous system to relax. Relaxation is not passivity. It's stability. Stable systems function more efficiently than tense ones. They use less energy, process information more clearly, and respond more accurately. So when understanding replaces self-criticism, the system becomes calmer. And when the system becomes calmer, movement becomes more natural, not forced, not dramatic, just possible. Often that is enough, because once something is possible, it can begin. The brain is not trying to stop you from doing what matters. It is trying to protect you from what it doesn't yet understand. That distinction changes everything, because it means hesitation is not a sign that something is wrong. It's a sign that something is new. And new experiences always take time for the nervous system to recognize as safe. Once it does, resistance fades on its own. Not all at once, but gradually, quietly, and reliably. So when you notice hesitation, it doesn't have to mean you're stuck. It may simply mean your brain is still learning, and learning is not an obstacle to progress. It is the process that makes progress possible.